I'm your host, Dino, and get ready to be inspired as you learn exactly how to own your role. Welcome, everybody, once again to the Own Your Role podcast. I'm your host, Dino. Excited to have you here for another episode where we talk to unique entrepreneurs, people who are solving problems in our business and helping us find the best practices on how to run them. And today is no exception with our guest. We'll get to him in just a moment, but I wanted to thank you again, as I do in every episode, for being a part of sharing this information to other people. I actually just got done with another event recently where I had somebody come up and say, I listened to all your episodes, I love your podcast. So I really appreciate it that not only the kind words, but that you are sharing it with people who you feel can benefit from our information out there. And as always, please remember, if this is your first time listening to the show, to like and subscribe to the show. So let's get started with the show with our guest today, Dr. Michael Neal, who is going to talk to us about something that I can't tell you how often I hear about this. If I had a nickel, right, for every time
Right.
it's my clients or anybody else talk about that, finding good team members and team members who stay and team members who want to be a part of your culture and help build up your practice. I don't believe that there are none out there. Like so many people say, oh, I can't find anybody who's no, I've tried everything, which is always not true. But today we're going to find a new and unique way and also find out why he created this process of doing what he does. So welcome to the show, Dr. Neal.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dino. Excited for this talk today.
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, I travel the country all the time, and it's probably the number one thing I hear from people is, how do I find good people? How do I find people who will help me build my business? And so I really am looking forward to diving into that today. But before we do, we always start our episode with our guest stories, because we believe that stories connect everyone together. So will you give us a little bit brief background of your story, how you decided to get into the business that you did and how this business evolved from that?
Absolutely. So I'm a practicing optometrist, and I know your audience tends to be a lot more people within the dental and orthodontic space. We're very well represented in that space with Build My Team. But my story is particularly in private practice. Years ago, before I started Build My Team, we were struggling like crazy to find team members. We've got a terrific private practice in the middle of nowhere in rural Pennsylvania. We don't have a talent pool. We have a talent puddle. And it used to be 6 inches deep, and now it's about 1.5 inches, I think. So it's very difficult to find people under a traditional hiring model. And so we had to create an entirely new approach. Doing so, it transformed everything, transformed our practice, the financials of the practice, the growth of the practice, and most importantly, from my standpoint, the stress level. It's enjoyable to go to work now. I have team members that run the entire business. We do think of it as a business. And we are just, as in general, a really happy place to work at this point. It was not like that until we changed essentially our mindset on who we were going to bring on board.
Well, that's how most things are, right? Until we actually, first of all, recognize the problem. And then second of all, go, all right, we got to do something about this. I want to ask you this, though. So why optometry? Why did you get into that space? I'm always curious to figure out why people chose the profession they did.
Eye care has always been fascinating for me since I was a little kid. And I wanted to, it could have been any type of private practice, but I've been fascinated with the visual system. More so than other areas, but I also wanted to make sure I could run a practice as well. I enjoy the business aspect of it.
Well, that's good, because a lot of people don't enjoy the business aspect of it. That's one of the reasons we do this podcast, is to help people hopefully enjoy that piece a little bit more. What would you say, when you first were coming up against this problem, was your biggest frustration or struggle? And by the way, when did that start, that problem?
I know what it ended. That's when we started the Build My Team process. It had been ongoing. I mean, I graduated in 2001. My wife and I started the practice. She did the bulk of that, and it's always been that way. We were hiring wrong, Dino. I mean, we were just flat out hiring wrong. And so many of your listeners, I hope this resonates, but we were using resumes to hire. We would post a job. The job would generally talk about us, not the candidate's contribution. It's not what's in it for you, it's what's in it for them. And we were doing that backwards. We were bringing in people based upon their resumes. We were bringing them in based upon experience. That is a massive red flag, which I'll talk about later on. Totally counterintuitive, but once you get over that hurdle, things change very quickly for you. And we were also bringing folks in based upon more of an empathetic, a doctor approach, if you will, not so much a professional approach in the sense of we wanted performers in the practice. We wanted to help people, to fix them, to cure them, to oh boy, help the wounded puppies, nurse them back to health, that type of thing. And it does not work. It's a disaster when you approach things like that. Being a doctor is amazing, and the better doctor you are, the better your practice does, I would argue, but also the further away from hiring you should be. If you are super empathetic and a terrific doctor, you will be manipulated within an inch of your life in a job interview by certain types of people. And if you, oh yeah, absolutely. If you look back upon your hiring record and you think in terms of, did that happen to me? You might see some evidence of that. So pivoting a little bit, how did we get out of that mess? What it really boiled down to is I took a look. I was in executive coaching at the time, a program called Strategic Coach, which some folks might have heard of.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic program. Went through that program and I saw how they were doing their hiring. They didn't start with resumes. They started with assessments. And it turns out, well, the question I asked myself is, what's an assessment? And what the heck are these guys using these for? Well, there's an entire industry, which it's called the psychometric industry. And all it does is it measures how people perform. It measures what they're capable of, all kinds of things like that. And so I look at how they were doing it, how the Four Seasons did their hiring, Disney, Ritz-Carlton, companies like that. And it turns out they all approach it the same. You apply for the job using the resumes, but they run everybody through assessments. They wouldn't dream of doing it otherwise. And so they're essentially hiring exactly upside down from the way we were. It's really no wonder that we were getting upside down results, is it?
Well, it's funny because I said wow in that sense, because I so love that you're saying this out loud to people, because I can't tell you how often I use this phrase a lot, which is, if you want a professional job done, hire a professional. And there's not a single doctor out there who is a professional recruiter, HR manager, understands how to do that. And so the fact that you're actually coming out and saying, why are we doing a job that doesn't make sense? And like you said, you're easily manipulated. Most of those job hires are done, in my opinion anyway, based upon necessity and fear. Like, we have an empty spot. We have to fill it, get a warm body as soon as possible. And even though we all have access to all the stats about how much a bad hire costs you or a wrong hire and what that investment is throughout a year. And I use a phrase all the time that when you bring somebody in for, just the fear of filling a position, that I say nothing will ruin a great team member faster than watching you tolerate a bad one. And that usually happens at the hiring process. So I love that you're so focused on that. I also love, if I can, to touch on the part about being about them. And this is really interesting, because we live in a world where, as a private practice owner, the fact matter is you can't offer the benefits that Amazon can, or the local big company that's in your town. You can't offer those type of 401ks or days off or whatever it is. You have to make it about them, so they feel like, oh, I'd rather have that benefit of a company who cares about me than about their own whatever they've got going on. So I love that's approach to it. What are some of the assessments that you like the most or found to be the most effective?
We didn't. We had to create this process ourselves.
Interesting.
The assessments that are out there, and there are gazillions of them, they each have their place in some form or another. What we were looking for is as close as possible to a foolproof system for very, very specific positions. So I'll give you an example. Medical secretary, an optometric secretary, a dental secretary, orthodontic secretary. Guess what? It's the same person. Okay. It doesn't matter what profession they're in. It's a front desk. You got phones that ring. You got a million people lined up. They all want your attention. It's a virtually identical job throughout those. So give you an example. Build My Team is in 9 different healthcare professions, over 40 different states. So if your listeners are thinking my practice is unique, the answer is 100% yes, it is, and 100% no, it isn't. And both of those are true at the same time.
Yeah.
So the way that we approach this is a foolproof way to reject almost everybody applying for the job. Okay, we're not looking for the A players or the B players. We're rejecting the D, E, F, C players, and we're removing them from the candidate pile. So, for example, in our process, the way this works is they apply for the job online. Our team members write that job. We post it to 22 different job boards. Okay. So you mentioned early on there, I just can't find people, right? Well, I got to ask you, are you posting to 22 different job boards? And that answer is no, of course not. Nobody has time to that. So our system's automated for that. Next thing, we get as many applicants as possible. And within 5 seconds of them hitting that button to apply for the job, they get a text on their phone. Why a text? Because candidates are not looking at emails.
Right.
It does not matter what they tell you. If they look at their email and check it once a week, I would be shocked. And by the way, they have long forgotten about applying for your job by the time you send them an email. We studied this. We had to stop for approximately 6 months and rewrite our system because we made a mistake. The mistake was banking on email. Now it's 100% text-based. So within 5 seconds, they get a text. They actually remember they still applied for your job. And it asks them to start through the assessment process. Approximately 50% of them balk. They don't do it. Guess what? We just saved you approximately 50% of the time that you were spending on your hiring. From there, they go through a mindset assessment. That's something we created, and that is to determine if they have a healthcare mindset. Because I got to tell your listeners, the vast majority of people who are applying for your practice jobs do not care about people. Okay. This is horrible. I know it sounds hard to believe, but here's what they're looking for. They want a statistically terrific job in a nice warm office or in a nice cool air conditioned office. They want to sit at a desk. It's not raining on them. Nobody's throwing stuff at them, anything like that. It's a great job compared to a lot of others. They don't necessarily have to care for people or want to help people. So we have to screen that out first off. In our model, if you don't like to care for people or help them, you really shouldn't be in healthcare.
Totally.
And we lose a bunch of people at that stage. And you can imagine this is a great big funnel, essentially.
Right.
Next thing we're assessing is their speed of learning. So I mentioned early on, experience is a bit of a red flag. What if you had somebody that you can bring on who learns super quickly, and you don't have to untrain or try and undo all those bad habits that they brought in from the other private practice that they're in? Well, we don't have to, because these people, they generally don't have those types of issues. So we do that. We measure a whole bunch of different performance factors. Things like, do they follow procedures and policies constantly? How warm and friendly are they with patients? Can they handle details? Are they bored by extended routine? What's their follow-up like? Their stress level, for crying out loud. If they handle most levels of stress, or if they can't handle stress, because each of these matter at different weightings for different positions, right? So you can have somebody who's working behind the scenes, not working directly with patients. Their stress tolerance isn't a big deal. You have somebody who is working at the front desk, dealing with people who don't understand their insurance. They need to wear a helmet and a flak jacket. It's a completely different position.
Sure,
right?
totally. Yeah.
So all of those things we're measuring. How much of that can you gain from a resume?
Not anything at all.
Right, exactly. But if you don't have this level of understanding about the person, these finalist candidates, how can you possibly how can you stack the deck for success? Right. And that's what we did in our practice. We stacked the deck so that when somebody comes in for an interview, because Build My Team staffs our practice as well, by the time they get to a physical in-person interview, we already know they can do the job. Think of how powerful that is,
Yeah, because you
right?
filtered them through. And for me, that's one of the big challenges. I think so many people rush that filter and they hire off of the first or second interview. I actually kind of went a little viral on TikTok about a year ago when I put out a video where I said I believe that every team should have at least 4 to 6 interviews before they actually hire someone. People are freaking out. Oh, you're wasting our time, blah, blah, blah. And I was saying, well, obviously all those interviews the first parts can be super quick. And this would be an example of that. What filters are we doing? And that's the whole point, to make
Yeah.
sure we get the right people walking in the door instead of wasting our time with people who aren't going to show up. Because if they get through all those assessments and they get through all those things, they're wanting the job. They're not wanting just to apply for a job.
Oh, I got something even better than that.
All right.
So remember, this is all automated. You can do it at 2, 3 in the morning if you want.
Oh,
We have all
perfect.
kinds of people who do that.
Mhm.
So now your practice using this approach is far more competitive for these job candidates than the practices down the road. And remember, you're not competing against dental practices or orthodontic practices.
That's
You're
right.
competing against eye care, chiropractic, all of them. Right?
Hell of them.
All
Yep.
of them. The urologist who's half a mile away. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
So our software also asks things like, what's your commute time? If it's too long, they're passing all those practices and you're not going to stay because they're going to get a job that's closer, costs them less gas
Great
money.
point. Great point.
Here are the hours of the practice. And the question is worded, are there any days or times that you're unable to work? Well, guess what? That has to be a no. Because if it's a yes, they're not going to be able to help you in your practice. You need that position and that's it. So we've got 10 different what we call knockout questions on top of this all. And when this is all said and done, you're left with a candidate that sounds fantastic on paper. Next thing our process does is sends them a one-way video interview. These are questions that they're asked, and there's about 10 questions that they're asked. These questions are identical for every single position. And you say, well, why the heck would you guys do that? We're not looking so much at what their answers are. We're looking at how they answer the question. A massive amount of intangibles about the person. We don't care if they're black, white, green, pink, or purple. None of that stuff matters. What matters is, are they answering the questions in a manner that would properly represent your practice? Are they going to be somebody who can talk just as easily to grandpa and grandma as to younger people, to kids, and everybody in between? There's a whole bunch of intangibles that we're looking for. And when that's all said and done, that's when we send them over to the practice to essentially interview in person or just tell them when to show up. So that's the level of ridiculous screening and stratification that we do. And my point earlier was, if you think that these folks won't jump through these hoops, when we send them a video interview, 97% of the people who get sent a link complete the video interview.
Wow, that's very impressive.
We lose 3% of those people. So in terms of what does that impact on your practice? These folks want the job.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many folks listening right now where you schedule an interview, they don't show up, they ghost you. So now you just lost revenue in your practice because you can't double book patients in an interview. We all know that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This removes the ability to sit around and wait for candidates, having all of that misery on top of you, because it just simply doesn't exist in our model.
So now that you've done all this filtering through, I think the natural question people might be asking is, the more you filter, the less people you're actually going to have willing to go through all of that. But if we're starting with the initial problem of people just not even applying for jobs anymore, where are you getting that pool instead of puddle that actually is going to give us people who want to be a part of your practice or want to actually apply?
Yeah, terrific question. So that's why our team writes the job descriptions. The job descriptions are designed to elicit certain types of candidates right off the bat with the language that they use. And also it's
You mean they're not just putting a title of the job and then like all the requirements necessary, like have this many years in that or this much experience in that?
Next. That's what they
right?
do.
I don't understand that.
They hit the next button. They're not reading any of that. If it looks like if it looks like it came out of a kitchen cookbook,
Yep.
they're moving on. What we want to do is, what's your contribution? So I'll give you an example. In an eye care practice, which I know very well, obviously,
Yeah, sure.
We're looking for things like, you're going to help people see, you're going to change their lives, you're going to help grandpa and grandma be able to attend their grandkids' sports games because they can see to the other side of the field, one thing after another. And it's the truth. I mean, that's what you do all day long in an eye care practice. Well, you've got smiles, you've got fixing people's teeth, you've got removing pain. Like this, let's face it, folks, we're in healthcare. You actually get to make an impact on a person's life.
Yep.
Right. So when you start to talk about things like that, especially to people who are not from the industry, from the profession, it's a big deal. We all tend to get a little perhaps jaded and just, we don't really realize the impact we have on people's lives because we've been doing it for so long.
That's
and
right.
over and over.
No,
but we
so
really
true.
get
them really emotionally connected to what the outcomes are that you're able to do for people. So I gotta ask the question though, because obviously COVID shifted things up. There was a shift even after COVID, and now let's talk about that evolution of what's actually been happening with the workforce that's out there and the options that are available. In your opinion, what's caused that? Where are we going? Where are we right now? Is it getting better, worse?
I don't know how you would run a private practice and hire if all you were looking for are experienced people. I don't know how you would do that. And it's almost a double down effect within the dental and orthodontic professions. COVID cleaned out dental practices. I mean, we all know that. I have such massive respect for practices that made it through that, and still had hair on their heads, and it was just that bad. Eye care was hit a little bit differently, but when the stories I've heard have generally revolved around certain positions. For example, hygienists would leave a practice for 50 cents an hour, 50 cents an hour or more, $1 an hour or more. No discussion, just boom, off they go. Give their air quotes 2 weeks, which we all know how long that actually lasts.
Sure.
And out they go. And next thing you know, the practice is just drowning. Well, it takes a while to create a dental hygienist, obviously. So that's a challenge. But there are all kinds of different people that want those types of positions. We just have to bring them in.
So right now, are we seeing more and more people like actually realizing, well, I mean, this is my interpretation of it, obviously, but I can't just depend on that government check anymore. And I actually want to get out and do stuff. Are we seeing more people come back into the workplace? And are they being as demanding as you'll hear people talk about when it comes to what they want, what they're willing to do or not do?
I don't think I have the best news on that front. Healthcare is challenging to get people into still, and that has not changed that much. Let's face it, when the government decided to hand out money and you could get paid for playing an Xbox or a PlayStation all day long, those are very challenging habits to undo. And so, the people who are applying, they do want to work. And when they get all the way through our process, they're invested. I mean, they're completely invested in this process. So I think generally applicants are down across the nation for healthcare, any type of healthcare role. And that stinks. It just makes it harder and harder for all of our practices. So we have to become innovative and approach this differently. And that's what unintentionally Build My Team was completely prepared for that.
I have a doctor out of Colorado that we used to talk about this a lot, because he would always at least have applicants. He'd always have people, even if there was some turnover, he'd always have some applicants. And I asked him once, I'm like, how come I hear from all these other doctors that they're not even getting people to apply versus you're always having? And he said, because of one thing, and it's what you just said a moment ago. He said, I always say no experience necessary. will
Mhm.
train. It doesn't matter what the position, he'll train them. And he actually, like you said, prefers that because he doesn't have to reteach them things or bad habits that they had before, or
Yeah.
that he gets to teach them from the ground up. Yes, it takes more time. Yes, it takes more effort. And that's why the screening ahead of time is so important, because you found somebody, hopefully, who will stick it out and stay, which brings me to my next question. With going through the process that you take them through, what's the stick rate, right? Because we all hear the stories of somebody showed up, hired them, and 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. I'm dealing with an office right now where they have not even in their 90 days yet. And two people have come to the doctor saying, man, this is really hard work. They're what I call director of first impressions. They're the people on the front desk.
Mhm.
And it's there's I don't know if I can do all this, and I need to go home at 5 every day. I can't do our evening huddle. So what's the stick rate for people for you right now?
Oh, it's vastly higher than a traditional way
I
of
bet it
doing it.
is.
Yeah, because so you mentioned a couple of things. That particular doc, just to jump in on that.
Yeah.
Why are they freaking out at the front desk? Well, first of all, everybody knows it's a challenging job. And if believe it or not, it was my first position in healthcare. I worked as
Oh.
a receptionist for about 20 minutes and it was terrible. Yeah, I was terrible at it. I'm wired the exact opposite of what that position requires. But it's a very hectic position. So I have a lot of respect for that. I would argue that those team members that were brought on, their stress tolerance wasn't measured. Their ability to follow policies and procedures, which is an absolute requirement in most areas of the practice, but critical at front desk. There's a whole bunch of things that are easily measured, which we do. And if those aren't right, what you're trying to do, and I say this with all due respect, is you're getting a bigger hammer trying to put a round peg into a square hole.
Mm.
You can hammer that all you want. It doesn't matter. The person's going to leave the position. This isn't the military. You
Yeah.
can't force them to do it.
Right.
They're gone. So what we have to do is work on the selection process of getting people, the old adage, you get them the right people on the bus. That's job number one. Then you get them into the right seats on the bus. That's job number two. And then you get them to drive the bus as fast as possible. And that's where things get really exciting. So I'll also give you an example from our practice. And this is something that blew me away. Completely unintentional and unexpected. 50%, almost exactly 50% of the people who applied for a job in our practice did not, the candidates that were hired did not get that job. We moved them to a different role.
Mm.
Half,
Wow.
mathematically half of people were moved to a different role because it was a better fit for their natural strengths and talents. Now, this is only one practice, which we know we have all the statistics on our hiring, obviously. But if you were to extrapolate that to the nation and it's anywhere close to half, can you imagine? I mean, you've got we've got people who do not understand what they're good at,
Yes.
especially younger people. But I would argue that virtually everybody doesn't
Yeah.
understand what they're good at. So you've got folks who they come in, they apply for A, they think A's like job A is where it's all at. And then we say, well, you'd be pretty good at that, but we think you would be great at job B. Now, they move forward with job B, a little apprehensive, of course, but they move forward on that and they're a terrific fit. What do you think the chances are that person stays?
A lot higher because they're working in their zone of genius.
Mhm.
And the fact that
Exactly.
you, as a business leader, what's so I think profound about what you just did is you said that we're going to assess and help them be in the best spot, not again, we're going to cram them into the space we need, which obviously means that if you don't have other spots for them to be in, you might have to recognize and say, you know what, this isn't going to be the best fit for you, and
Mhm.
allow them to move on somewhere else. I think there's way too many people out there that will force it to happen because of their own, and I say this with all due respect, their own selfish desires of just getting somebody in that spot. And it's obviously going to end up in disaster. Yes, of course, every once in a while, there's the person who finds their calling there or they feel it and it being good.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's not going to work out that way.
And folks are really concerned about initially, our new clients are essentially concerned, well, I won't really have the ability to train people. I won't do this. I won't do that. What they're really thinking, if you peel the onion all the way back, is I don't know how to hire somebody and train them, because the people that I brought on are dumb as a box of rocks. They are incapable of, so it very quickly becomes this negative feedback loop where I can't bring on somebody without experience, because the last 5 times, 10 times I've done that, it has been a disaster. I understand that, went through that, lived that. It was miserable. However, when you bring in people who have the natural talents and strengths for the particular position, and how do we know that? Because we measure. We bring them in with those natural talents and strengths. We put them into a role that requires those. They get up in the morning, they go to work, they do a spectacular job. They don't think anything of it. It is a non-starter to them. They just go in, do a great job. They're an A player. And guess what happens to your team when you start to do that? A players want to work only with A players. They will tolerate B players, and they will quit that job in a heartbeat.
Yep.
Because of C players. Now, they can get a job anyway. They're rock stars. But what happens when you bring those people onto the team, you immediately start a cultural upgrade within your practice. And there's so many practices out there that are very, very concerned about, well, what happens if I lose Susie or Sally? They're superstar. They have to constantly do everything they can to keep that particular person happy, or the place would fall apart without them. And I lived that for a long time. The difference is, through the build my team approach, we have what we call talent certainty. I'm certain that in my practice, I can fill any position within a reasonable amount of time. And the way I look at it, and this is not rose-colored glasses, I have an opportunity to upgrade on the last person that we worked with. So whatever that person is doing in that role, we make a list of all the things we love about that person in the role and all the things that we could improve on. And that's given to build my team. And then the person at build my team who's working with our practice considers that when they're looking through the different candidates. So we upgrade each time somebody leaves. Now, the other part of this is we're healthcare. Somebody's always going to leave your practice. You're not going to have somebody working there for 30 years every single time.
Right.
It's the nature of these positions. They're not generally breadwinner type positions where you're going to spend years and years and years of your life there. There are some exceptions. In our practice, we've got a couple people over 10 years, but that is very rare. Most of the time, it's a different story. So as long as you accept that fact, of course, we try and minimize it, but getting these people on in an automated way where they're working in their strengths and talents, I don't know any other way to do it. And I also would not even dream of going back to a resume, because I can't measure anything. I can't stack the deck for my practice. I can't outcompete the other people who are hiring in our area, because I don't have anything other than the same system that they're using if I'm using resumes.
No, absolutely right. And I'm so glad you tied in the idea of the hiring and then also the training process of it. And I had a little bit of an aha, and it just makes sense. It's like a logical outcome. If you're hiring people and you're in the manner that you are, and you're actually making sure that you're putting those people with the right talent in the positions that require their talent, you worry about time and training, they're obviously going to train a heck of a lot faster, because they're already naturally adapted to those that they might not know how to, change an arch wire right now, but they understand, because they like things, the challenge of things, they like understanding how things work naturally. They're going to be more curious about the thing, so they're going to learn it faster. So your training time is down. And then I love the idea too of this. They will help bring up the other members of the team as well, and work I mean, yeah, it's going to take probably some time. If you have a whole team right now that's maybe not right fits, you're going to need to take some time to steer that boat. Totally get it. But I'd rather do that and bring my culture up with new team members. I have a saying that I use a lot, which is the staff infections. Like, I don't call people staff because the staff is
Right.
infected. No, nobody wants. So that team member is, yes, sometimes we bring in staff infections, but we also can do the opposite. We can bring somebody in that, if they're the right person and if you're the right leader, can elevate everybody else and make everybody step up just a little bit more.
Yeah, they can be staff infectious, not an infection.
There you go. Love that. Yeah, love that.
We our practice was an extreme example of this. My ops manager, who runs both Build My Team and the practice, he did something that I am still astounded by. There's a spreadsheet that he created where each of the people in our practice were ranked green, yellow, red, just like a traffic light. There were 2 that were green, and I should say 3 that were 2 that were green, 1 that was yellow, and a couple others that were yellow and red. The red people were replaced.
Sure. Makes sense.
And then we moved on to the yellow people. And then one of the yellow people was switched roles. She went from front desk to patient coordinator, and spectacular in that role. Because we had her in the wrong seat on the bus. She wasn't using her natural talents and strengths. And so that took a little over 2 years to do that. Now, I know most practices aren't going to do that. Here's where this gets really interesting. I don't know how to describe this other than my stress and my wife's stress as the 2 docs in the practice plummeted. If I had to guess, well over 90% reduction in stress.
Wow.
It's a completely different place to show up for work. The other thing, and this is where it gets really interesting, our gross income increased by approximately 50%, a little under that. We went from 14 team members down to 10 at the same time as our gross increased like that. And then our net almost tripled.
I'm so not surprised to hear this at all. It's an argument I make all the time.
So what part of that is not fantastic on the owner's side of things?
Yeah, it's so good.
And it's not me. I'm not the genius behind this. I've got team members that are driving that bus. I put the guardrails on the road, and then I tell them where we're going to go. So guardrails and a map. That's my job. Yep. And then their job is to drive that bus as fast as prudently possible. They're not going crazy. They're not going to fly off a cliff, but they need to drive that bus as fast as they can. And that's what they do. And that's what happens when you get a bunch of A players, and we'll call them B+ players on your team. That's how you do it.
No, it's so brilliant. It makes so much sense. Like I said, I make that argument all the time. When you increase the emotional intelligence of the people in your office, when you increase the output that they are giving because they naturally want to and they want to be there, and I guess in general, if you increase the culture, you're going to make more money. You're going to be more profitable. You're going to be more efficient. It's just, we can see the opposite happening in large corporations right now, that when they are shifting their focus away from their core values and their culture, they're losing a ton of money. We have to know that that's going to happen inside of our practices as well. So how do people reach out to you and figure out if they're right candidates for Build My Team, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it's really easy. You go to buildmyteam.com and schedule a free consultation. Our team members will, everything's scheduled so that our doc's time is respected, and hop on a discussion, have a very brutally honest discussion with our team members. They have heard everything from all over the place. You're not alone.
That's right.
And as soon as we get to the brutal honesty behind it, we can take a look at how incredibly effective our process can be for you. If it can't be effective for you, we will not work with you. Not interested in that. This is just as we are super selective about candidates for your practice, we're also super selective about the people we work with, because we want to knock it out of the park for your practice. And we do this around the country so that you can hire, believe it or not, through our process, you can hire somebody from the initial discussion all the way through to that person who was given a start date in your practice in under an hour of your time. Yep.
Wow. Wow.
That's how automated this is.
Wow.
Believe it or not.
So
So
if I'm listening to this right now, and you said this, like we won't work with people who aren't the right, who is the right fit client? How do I self-assess? And it sounds pretty obvious, but how can I self-assess myself to know if I'm the right fit for you?
the easiest way is if you're absolutely sick and tired of the results that you're getting, you want an automated, methodical approach that removes the emotion out of the process, and that you think that the strengths and talents, natural strengths and talents, is a better approach than simply looking at resumes. You have one, two, or three of those, we're going to hit it off great, and there's really no going back at that point. And
Yeah, I'm
one
sure.
thing I have to mention, our service is incredibly affordable. It is incredibly affordable, not based upon salaries or anything like that. We have a flat fee for one-time hires, and we have what we call a membership, which is a big discount for practices where we're doing the hiring for them on a regular basis. So
Well,
again, it's shockingly less than you would think.
well, let's even look at I mean, people who follow me or hear me speak, they know that it's the human life value that's even more important than the investment to it. Of course, the investment, there's going to be an investment there. But you just mentioned something a moment ago, I think is so crucial that you and your wife experienced, which is the decrease in stress, the frustration that you don't have to have when you put your head on a pillow at night thinking about Susie or Johnny or whoever that is causing these challenges, or that open spot, or will I find somebody who can replace them that I won't have to replace
Right.
again in 3 months? All of those questions are an investment in your health and in your life and your human life value. So whatever the investment, if you can balance that with what you're going to get out of it as a business owner and that peace of mind, that's huge.
And I'll tell you, a great example of that is we went through COVID, did not close a day in our practice. We were open the entire time
Wow.
and did not lose a team member through that entire pandemic.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
We we were blessed with an absolutely terrific team, and I hope I've explained the process of how we got them and how repeatable and predictable this is.
Wow. Wow, Mike. I think what you're doing is so crucial as a service. I can't tell you how often I have talked to people about, man, somebody's got to figure this out. Somebody's got to find a way to help service. I've had a few areas here and there, a few people who've reached out to me here and there. I've never heard anything this thorough. So I think that's fascinating. And the fact that you are diving into a pool or pulling from a pool of, you said 20 different sources?
22.
22 different sources. So you don't have to do the work as the owner. You let Build My Team do all the work. I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
sharing
Dino.
that information with us. I know you're going to cause so much good, and there's not a state you don't work in, right? So it's not like exclusive to certain states.
No, US and Canada. We don't hire doctors or the licensed positions. Those are the two things we don't do. Everything else is fair game.
Man, that's amazing. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. We end our show with every episode with 4 questions that I ask everyone around owning their role. And it's just top of your mind, first thing that comes to your head.
Sure.
Are you willing to play?
Absolutely. Sounds like a fun game.
So the first one is, what do you feel is your highest and greatest responsibility on this earth?
To create these game-changing approaches to solving problems like what I did with Build My Team. I looked at the hardest problem we had in our profession and created a way to solve it to the point of like, this is completely solved. We don't have to change this any further. I've done that. This is one example, and I've done that a couple times before. That's what, as strategic coach calls it, it's my unique ability. That's their branding on it.
Yeah, it's a great unique ability for sure. Awesome. What do you want as the ultimate outcome for your life?
Super happy kids Whatever that looks like, I don't care. I want super happy kids, super happy impact on the world and making the world a better place, not only through my children, myself and my wife as well.
Nice. What do you consider true leadership to be?
Providing a crystal clear vision, not being anywhere close to afraid of what that looks like, how to execute it, or otherwise, and making very difficult choices in order to achieve that vision.
Lastly, truth is that we will all have one final day on this planet. Hopefully it's far, far from now. But what experience do you hope or want to have between now and dead?
Oh, I'd love to visit space.
Oh,
Absolutely. I think that would be fantastic. And I think that's probably doable. I'm almost 50, so
yeah.
I think that's probably doable. But that would be one experience I think would be something else. Yeah.
That's really cool. That we've never had that one before on this.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think about that sometimes. Like, would I want to do that when you ever hear the people going up in the Virgin Atlantic and stuff and going,
Yeah.
I want to do that. I think that would be just an extraordinary opportunity to figure that out, to see that.
I'd like to set foot on some other place. I mean, those guys went up to 300 and some thousand feet. I'm talking about putting a foot down someplace. That would be
Like, ooh.
Yeah.
Like,
That
wow.
might be a bit of a stretch, but how about you? What's your answer to that? I'm super curious.
So for me, on a personal level, I've always wanted to write a musical.
Oh,
Since
wow.
I was a kid, I want to write a musical that, whether it goes to Broadway or not, I'd have the very specific vision. I write it in my head all the time. I have plenty of it laid out. So for me,
Wow.
it's writing a musical and having it performed and having my full idea of a musical done. So yeah,
Oh,
my
that's fantastic.
close friends know that, but yeah. Well, man, thank you so much for being a part of the show and sharing your role with us and how you are owning it. It really is a pleasure to hear people who see a problem, figure out how to fix it, and share it with the world like you have and what you're doing. And I hope we can help you grow that.
Thank you so much, Dino. I really get excited about helping practices solve this problem because it gets them to be able to help more people, more patients, and do it in a joyous way where they really get a kick out of going to work and helping folks.
Yeah,
It doesn't
for
really
sure.
become work as much anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You get to focus on things you love to do and why you got involved in the first place.
In the first place. Yep.
Powerful. All right. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. And again, please reach out to buildmyteam.com and talk with Mike and his team. Gosh, it's not going to cost you anything to just reach out, find out if you're the right fit. And if you are, which I think the majority of people listening to this, I can't think of anybody who's not a right fit, who can use this service and use the opportunity and change your life, take that stress out of your life, and find more ways to build your team. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time on the Own Your Role podcast.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dino.